Across the South and West, coronavirus surging, prompting the Health and Human Services Secretary to issue this grim warning.
The window is closing. We have to act, and people as individuals have to act responsibly. We need to social distance. We need to wear our face coverings if we're in settings where we can't social distance, particularly in these hot zones.
Well, it's great to have you on, man. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad. I know we were just kind of trying to figure out a time that was working for both of us, and it was a little tough, traveling up to Maine again for a couple of weeks. So I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Whereabouts in Maine were you?
So primarily in the Booth Bay area.
Yep.
So my wife's family has kind of been going up there for like the last 100 years or something. So that's kind of become their staple. And so I've been shooting a lot around Booth Bay and Southport, those areas. And I'm kind of, but now I'm kind of getting to the point where I feel like I've gotten a lot of what I can get. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's still plenty more places, but now I'm kind of starting to like, I want to venture out more. So I want to kind of use that as like a base camp and just travel all around the state.
Yeah, no, that's a great spot. I was up there last year. In fact, I was up there about 2 weeks ago. I did kind of a little marathon, 24-hour marathon, where I started in York and ended up in Camden.
Okay.
And there was this one Instagram site called Route One, and they contacted me and they said, "Would you be interested in doing a Route One challenge?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll spend 24 hours somewhere on route or close to Route One, and see how many different images that I can come up with, of different places." I had an ulterior motive. I had some lupins, a big lupin field that I wanted to shoot up in the Camden area.
Okay.
So I knew I was already going there, so I kind of pieced everything together and came away with some great weather and just a perfect. It was cloudy all morning, and I could shoot all morning, and stopped at Bailey Island and Cundy Harbor, and stopped through Booth Bay, and then made my way up to Camden and shot over in Port Clyde and several other different areas along the coast, and really had a great adventure.
That's cool. And yeah, I did see that on your Instagram that you were posting. It was like I think you had like one post every day, kind of in that like mid coast of Maine, areas.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Started at 5 a.m. at York and finished at Rockport Harbor at 5:13 a.m. the next morning. So
no kidding. So would you like stop kind of like every 30 minutes and just found any composition that would do and sort of take a photo?
Yeah, kind of a combination. I do a lot of scouting. So about half the locations I was familiar with and I wanted to go shoot again, and another half of the ones I had not seen yet. So it was more of an exploration trip. But with the good weather, I found out that I could shoot them late morning, early afternoon until the clouds cleared. And then I took about a break of about 2 or 3 hours and then went out to this lupin field that a friend of mine had mentioned. So shot out there for a couple hours and ended in Port Clyde, and then knew I was going to get a good sunrise the next morning. So I started off at 4 a.m. and down in Camden and worked my way down to Rockport Harbor and said, okay, that's all I can get in 24 hours.
That's a lot though. I mean, especially like, one thing in with landscape photography myself, but especially in just with speaking with other people that are doing it for a living is like the summer months are so oppressive because if you want to do kind of everything, like if you're going to get up for sunrise and if you're going to do sunset and gold hour and blue hour, and you're going to do Milky Way, it's like you're occupying 20 hours of the 24 hours because it's like by the time you're done, let's say in June, July, shooting the Milky Way, I mean, you could get a few Milky Way shots probably by midnight or 1 because it rises fairly early at that point.
Right.
But I mean, the sun rises, I think, at this point at like 4:30-ish, something like that. But it's not like you can just get up at 4:30. It's like if you want that transition into sunset, that really begins at like 4. So you need to be up at like 3:30, 3:45, something like that. I mean,
you just reverse your schedule. I did this last year. I took a group to Iceland, And I just said, guys, we're starting at 8 o'clock at night, and we're shooting till 4 in the morning. And then we'll sleep, and then get up at 10 a.m. and travel, get to the next site and shoot again from 8, and that's the way I tend to do it over here. I'll start about 6, 7 o'clock at night. I'll shoot all night, take a little nap, get up, as you mentioned, sunrise, twilight is at 4, and, you're shooting till 5:30, 6 in the morning, and then, call it an evening. So the 12 hours of photography, it's just the other 12 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is crazy. I remember kind of coming to that realization a couple of years ago that, like, I mean, if you are, I think maybe the difference between somebody who's like, I enjoy photography and I like to take good landscape shots, and maybe someone who's like, I'm really in it. Like I'm really trying to make this happen as a career or something in that sphere. It's that realization. Well, if you're going to do it in the summertime, it's like you're going to have, especially in those, like that, let's call it a 1 week period where the Milky Way is, kind of between the quarters.
Right.
I mean, it's like you have this like 7-ish day period where it's like, you're really not doing a lot of sleeping. I mean, it's intense.
Yeah. Like I said, if you can reverse your hours, you get away with it. Unfortunately, I'm one of those guys who can nap pretty well. So I'll go and shoot the Milky Way till 1 or 2 a.m. and then I'll kind of nap down for 2 hours and get up at 4 a.m. and start shooting again. But then during the day, I take a 3 or 4 hour nap or something like that. So.
Right. I think maybe it's a little tougher. I'm just never been that big of a nap guy. I don't know what it is. It's like I'm too ADHD where it's like, well, the sun's up. What the hell? I don't know what it is, but I've always had trouble with that. I think maybe as I've gotten a little older, it's starting to be a little easier. But yeah, in general, that's kind of hard for me to do. But you know what? I suppose like in a place like Iceland, maybe it's a bit easier because you're sort of screwed into having daylight all day anyway.
Yep.
It's kind of a moot point what time it is, right?
Yep. And all you're trying to do in Iceland is, the magic hours there are extended in the summer. So you literally get 3 hours of magic hour from 8 to 11. You shoot twilight, it never goes down. You kind of shoot twilight for a couple hours, and then you get another 3 hours of magic hour, before the sun, after the sun rises, but it barely comes up. So you can just shoot till like 4 a.m. And then you're just going to a room where, they already have it outfitted with blackout blinds.
Right.
So you just jump in there and, go from there.
Right. I think the idea of shooting in some of those, like Nordic, Arctic Circle-ish type of places is really cool in that, where most people are sort of so used to this idea of like, okay, the light's good. We've got, 30 minutes, get a good shot, and then you're out of time.
Yeah.
It must be a really cool feeling to be like, I can grab 8 different compositions because I've got so much time. Like the light is amazing for like half the day. I mean, that's really cool.
I'll tell you, Adam, I had a sunset in Reykjavik that started about 11:45. The official sunset was like 12:10. That sunset went till 1:30 in the morning. So I literally had sunset colors for almost 2 hours.
Yeah, that's nuts.
And, you're saying, wow, if I get 15 minutes, out of a sunset with great colors,
right.
It's an amazing one. And there you're just sitting there going, does it ever stop?
Yeah. That's so wild.
It kind of stops when the sun gets high enough up where it kind of burns off the sunset. So it's really an experience. And plus, all the tour buses are gone. So the only people that are out are photographers.
Right. I know I've been talking about Iceland with some of my guests and how that might be one of the best places to go fairly soon, in spite of everything that's been going on. Because I know Iceland has really done a very good job with mitigation. And I thought I heard that they were sort of opening up to like tourism maybe a little bit faster than than other countries were. So I get the feeling that that may be a pretty popular destination for landscape photographers. Not that it isn't already, but
Right.
Perhaps more so than ever. Like it's sort of like, well, hey, if what are the staples? Like, right, people go to Patagonia, or they go to obviously Iceland, New Zealand. There's a number of these sort of like bucket list type of photography destinations, and I get the feeling that's going to be one that people are going to go to maybe quicker than they might have ordinarily, just because of those circumstances.
Yeah, they were opening up, but they keep pushing it back, and they keep actually not allowing Americans in.
Well, who can blame them, I guess.
Yeah, so they actually have opened, I think they're opening the 1st of July. No, they were opening the 1st of June. But then they extended the ban on Americans until, I believe, the first part of July.
Okay.
So they were opening up, but then they kind of reversed themselves on Americans.
Yeah.
I had a friend that was all set to go there. He had cleared himself like the 15th of June. And then he got the note, that he couldn't go because they had reversed their decision.
Oof. That's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a moving target.
Right. Also quite funny and ironic that here we are as Americans, the people that are probably more used to the other side of things, of like, yeah, you can't really come here. All of a sudden we're experiencing like I don't know, I guess what like other countries have probably experienced for the last however many decades of like, oh, you won't let me go in? Damn, it's just... Right.
Yeah. Or we won't let you come in.
Right.
Yeah. And now the shoe's on the other foot.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. How's everything been for you as far as the COVID and quarantine situation? I would imagine that it's changed a lot of how you've been doing things.
Yeah, it has. I do 3 months in Florida, so it's kind of interesting. I've been pretty fortunate in this because I was in Florida from mid-February till the 1st of May, and we really didn't have a lot of restrictions in Florida. So I kept shooting there. I had a workshop that was canceled. But I could shoot, beach scenes, and I could do, I go to St. Augustine, so it's a great historic town to shoot. And so I continued to do a lot of shooting, in the North Florida, Southern Georgia area.
Mm-hmm.
And the beaches stayed open the whole time. And we kind of extended our stay because New England obviously was pretty well shut down.
Right.
And then I got back up here. May was I just shot locally in Central Mass where I live, tried to find some locations, and, going out, like you said, at 5 a.m. for sunrise, you don't fear. So I did a lot of moon shooting. I did,
right.
I shot some moon rises and moon sets in Boston and Providence and some other areas that I had on my schedule to shoot in Newport, and some areas that I knew I could get in and wasn't going to disturb anybody. And then about the 1st of June, I started to kind of venture back out and get back down to the Cape and get back, like I said, the Maine trip and, a couple other short trips. I've been to Maine a couple times now. I tend to do a lot of coastal shooting in the summer. I'm really not a big fan of summer shooting in the mountains. I just get overwhelmed with green.
I know the feeling.
I don't find, I don't find it to be, I love to shoot in Vermont, New Hampshire, in the fall and winter. But once you get into kind of the spring, summer, to me, it's just not an attractive place to shoot. So I tend to move my shooting. One of the joys of living in New England is I got a lot of variety. So
true.
I can go to the Maine coast. I can go to the Cape. I can go down to Rhode Island coast. I can do some city shooting, in Portland or Boston or Providence or Newport or some of those areas. So I tend to kind of move in cycles, and then I'll get into flower shooting. So I'll do daffodils in early May, and then I'll do tulips in late May. And I know good locations for that. I was just up doing the lupins in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire, for a couple of days around the middle of June. So I'll probably go down and do the roses out on Nantucket first part of July, and then I'll move over to sunflowers down in Connecticut, where I've got 4 or 5 sites that I always like to go back, and then I'll check the weather and see if I'm getting good optimal conditions, and go down and continue to shoot some scenes that I know about. And obviously I bookmark some scenes that, I've come upon, and kind of file away as I did on the main trip, where I'll do some exploration.
One of the things that I realize this, certainly I realize it, but it's taken me a long time. And I suppose maybe it's just lack of experience, I guess, but it's taken me a while to kind of start building up almost like an inventory in my head of, the time of year, and sort of having a geographic calendar as it pertains to that time of year. And it sounds like you've got a pretty well established one. So sort of like, okay, these flowers are kind of at their peak at X time of year at this location. And so knowing that, it's probably a lot easier to then start thinking about your composition, because it's almost like I find that it's easiest to be creative once you've kind of put a fence around things mentally, and you say, well, look, like, this is my limitation. I have to do this. So you go, now what am I going to do? And it's like, when you've lessened all of your possibilities, I think it's much easier to actually go, okay, well, I can only do one of these 8 things. So what's my composition? And you can really end up with some great shots that way. Whereas if you just sort of, the world is my oyster, what am I going to shoot? It's like, you can never really settle on something and have a focus on that thing. And I get the impression that you really do a lot of that. Like, you have a pretty good idea maybe at the beginning of the year of like, here are the like 50 shots that I'm going for this year, or something like that.
Yep. And that's exactly right. I've been shooting, avidly, I guess, for about 10 years in New England, kind of professionally for the last 5 years, leading workshops and, writing ebooks and, doing a lot of, different things, for, really kind of to monetize my hobby.
Right.
It's not a profession. I'm retired. I do it for the pure joy of it. But also I looked at it and said, well, I can do some things that I still enjoy, and, help pay for my equipment or help pay for workshops or whatever. Cause I'll take 3 or 4 workshops, not workshops, but 3 or 4 big trips a year. This year being the exception. So, I kind of look at that and say, well, if I can do some stuff, and bring in some income, then, then I can go to Holland for a week, or I can go to Valensole Plateau and shoot the flowers, in Provence, for a week, and and I can go here or there, and it kind of all. I tell my tax guy, I said, all I want to do is be neutral at the end of the year.
Right.
And
well, that's a good goal to have. I mean, it's hard enough to make money in this business.
It is.
Even just saying I'm traveling for free is still a pretty good like benchmark to try to hit.
Yeah. But to your question, having gone now to the locations as often as I've come, I now kind of do a deep dive into that location. So, for example, I went to Sugar Hill, which is I was supposed to run a workshop, but I had to cancel the workshop on the 15th of June. So I said, well, I'm going to go up there anyway, because I like shooting the lupins up in that little town. And I said, but I'm going to go to my main sites. I had 3 or 4 main sites that I would have taken the tour group to. But I'm also going to do some deep dives into the backwoods and see if I can find some different fields. So, I'll stop in at, the Pancake House and the country store, and, and I'll talk to people, and I go, any sites, any locations that about that, that the general population doesn't know about or aren't on the festival list. And, I got actually 2 really good sites this year.
That's cool.
That I went into that were completely off the beaten track, that I went in and found some really cool fields with some really nice compositions in them. And they turned out to be, some real favorites, but I also got some good weather as well. Got some good sky, got some beautiful clouds moving in right at sunset. So I was fortunate to kind of combine some good planning with some good luck, which usually is hopefully in some good images.
And all because you asked too, right?
Right.
So let that be a lesson. It's never,
Right.
It's never, is as lame as you think it is to ask for directions, right?
Not
Or
at
in this
all.
case,
Not
say,
at
hey,
all.
you happen to know any cool spots that only a local would know? And maybe sometimes they say yes.
They do. Yeah, absolutely. And they're all, up there, they're happy to share it too. I mean, the thing you find out about, you get out of the big cities in New England, everybody's very friendly. So
Totally. Yeah, I've always found that about people in Maine. It's almost to the point where it's like almost an inside joke with my wife and I, where it's like if you just stumble across somebody that's just like a very nice, kind person that's just sort of willing to give you information or a favor without, asking for it. It's almost like, oh, they're either Canadian or they're from Maine. Like obviously, you know, they're just almost bizarrely friendly people up there, I've found.
yes. Yep, exactly right. So we'll do that. Like I said, I've got July fairly well planned out. I'll probably go back to Maine a couple more times. As I mentioned, I write ebooks. I've got 7 ebooks on New England now. And I always try to get 10 to 12 different locations that are kind of all within an hour to 2 hours of each other. And when I get enough images accumulated and enough spots accumulated, I'll usually then produce an ebook. So I'm looking at Maine, kind of breaking it down into 4 areas. I'm looking at, and first of all, starting with kind of southern Maine, Portland,
Right.
south to the border. And then I'm looking at the mid-Maine coast. And those are the 2 areas I'm focusing on this year.
Mhm.
Long term, I'd like to do something on Acadia,
Yep.
and even longer term, probably something on the northern Maine coast. So
Yeah.
kind of getting images that I like from those particular areas, getting 10 or 12 locations, getting seasonal, so I don't want to shoot everything in the summer, so I try to get a mix of at least a couple seasons in there where I'd recommend people going to shoot. So
Right.
in some cases, I went up last winter and shot a lot of winter shots in Maine. And now I'm coming back and trying to do some summer shots in Maine. And I'll probably try to get up there one time in the fall and
Yeah.
kind of do a deep dive into some locations.
Yeah, and I have to say, I obviously haven't gotten a chance to look over the entirety of it, but but your ebook about fall shooting in New England is very thorough. Like I was almost surprised that you could actually have that much data about. But then when you really stop and think about it, like what we're talking about with all the planning that really goes into, like, how do I limit my options down to like 3? It's like that's the type of research that it really takes to be able to know, to put that much of a fence around something and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to show up until the sun does what I want it to, or the clouds, or
Right.
whatever. But yeah, man, it's really, really thorough. And I'm really excited because I definitely am planning on doing some fall foliage stuff in New England this year. So I've actually, it's funny. I've never really done like a foliage shoot. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just that around the fall, other stuff in my life just starts to, I'm not even really sure, but the past year or 2, I've really been making a much bigger push to go beyond the hobby and really like, make myself better, make myself more knowledgeable, come up with better images, all that kind of stuff. So I've really made like much more of an effort to do that. So I fully intend to take some of your advice from that book, come September, October, and try to get some really nice shots up there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my style, Adam, has been, if people ever inquire to me on where I shot something, like I said, I do this for fun. So to me, it's always fun when somebody comes in and says, can you give me that location? And as long as somebody didn't give me that location, and say, don't pass it on.
Mm-hmm.
If I find it, or if it's a very popular location, as there are quite a few up in Vermont and New Hampshire, I go, this is when I go. And obviously, if you've seen the book, it's, this is where you park. This is
Right.
this is the path to get to the shooting site. This is the time of day. This is the the week in October that I'd recommend that you go, and hopefully some tips specific to that particular location. So, and again, I don't want people to just show up and shoot what I shot.
Right.
Because I always tell people, there's not a hell of a lot of original locations anymore with cell phones and cameras and everything else. I mean, you see almost every possible location. I'm really surprised when I find a location that I haven't seen before.
Right.
But I always tell people there's original perspectives.
True.
There's original weather. So get to the scene. I can tell you that scene's going to be a great scene. And one of the things I always tell people, one of my favorite places because it's local is a place called the Old Stone Church here, just in the Worcester area, and it's an iconic location with this church, old abandoned church sitting out on a peninsula with a big American flag draped, on the front side, and it's an absolutely beautiful little peninsula that sticks out in the Wachusett Reservoir, and you can shoot it morning, you can shoot it evening. You can shoot it from 10 different locations, because you got almost a 270-degree location on it. You can shoot it spring, you can shoot it winter, you can shoot it fall, you can shoot it summer. I said, there's not a more universal location.
Right.
I said, but I keep going back to it because I keep trying to test myself to come up with an image that's unique.
Yeah.
And, so I always, when I do a presentation for a camera club or something like that, I'll show them 10 images of the Old Stone Church. And then I'll go, you probably are asking, why do I continue to shoot this thing? And then I'll show them 2 images, one from October and one from December, of last year, where I got my favorite images of the church after shooting it for 8 years. With probably a couple thousand different tries.
Right.
So I tell them, keep going back because you never know when you're going to hit the perfect conditions. And if you do that planning and you just keep trying, eventually you come up with something that is hits your portfolio.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. In fact, you've kind of touched on 2 of the things that I've noticed have become themes of this podcast. One of which was actually told to me by Michael Shainbloom, who's about as big as it gets, I suppose, in landscape stuff. And it was very interesting because, first of all, a lot of photographers, big or small, seem to have this imposter syndrome. It's like, can I really bring anything to the table for a scene which has just already hit the books and the internet 1,000 times over? And even somebody like Michael Shainbloom was very, candid in telling me that, like, I am afraid to go to some locations because I just don't know if I can really put a unique perspective on it. And I thought 2 things when he told me that. I thought, first of all, oh shit. Because if you're thinking that, it's like, what the hell are the rest of us earthlings going to do? But 2, it was reassuring because I thought that's good. It's good to know that kind of self-doubt, or that, am I really that good, affects anybody. And so it's not a reason to sideline, an ambition that you may have, because, well, hey, I mean, if other big time people are thinking that, then, maybe it's not so bad that you have a little self-doubt. And one of the things that he was talking about was when he went to New Zealand, and he thought, New Zealand is, I don't know, maybe the most iconic landscape place in the world. I mean, that is really, one of those places. And he was talking about, I can't remember the particular area, but it was one of the, vastly photographed spots. And he just thought, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull it off here. And ultimately he did. I think he tried to sort of ignore what was on the internet, like just, almost like, if I don't see this cliche image, maybe I won't be so inclined to look for it.
Right.
Milford Sound is where.
Sure. Yep.
And so he ended up kind of, I guess, like camping and just kind of walking around the area for a few days until eventually he found a composition that was not one of these regurgitated places. And so he was able to get something a little bit unique. And then the other thing that he mentioned was how if you're setting yourself up for disappointment, if you're going on a trip to take photos and you think to yourself, I'm going to take the most amazing sunset or whatever of this place, because you're bullshitting yourself. Because if you think about it, the people that have the best photo of a location, like to your point about Worcester, are the people that live there. Because if I live in Milford Sound and I can go every single sunset on the 750th try, no one will ever get that shot because I actually have the best sunset that's ever been there. But if you go to a place for a week or 10 days, maybe you'll get one good sunset, but it's not going to be as good as the guy who actually has the ability to go there every single day. And so maybe it's the healthier thing is to set the threshold a little bit lower and just say, I'm happy that I'm here. I'm going to do what I can, but I'm not going to be disappointed if I don't get the Nat Geo, quality image.
Right. And I would agree with the vast majority of those statements. And, setting your goals reasonably. I went to Holland last year and never been to Holland. And to your point, you'd say, well, in 7-8 days in Holland, what are you going to come up with?
Mm-hmm.
That hasn't been shot by, people that live in Holland. And are you going to catch the perfect foggy morning, at Kinderjek or this tulip field? Is it going to be at perfect bloom?
Right.
And I said, you know what? So I might not get the 100% best image ever, but I'm going to try to get as good an image as I can. And also that I tend to look at what's already been shot there, so that I can form my own opinion on maybe how to shoot it a little bit differently. So I always go into, to a site and I'll say, okay, I'm going to shoot the postcard image, the one that everybody's familiar with.
Right.
But now I'm going to ask myself, how can I make it different? And, I probably shot 4,000 images in Holland, and I came away with 2 images that I thought were portfolio quality images. And
right.
I was very pleased. But if you go over there saying I'm going for a week and I want to come back with 20, portfolio images, you already set yourself up for failure.
Right. And you're either the best photograph, you're the best picture taker in the world if you actually can come up with that, or maybe your portfolio's not that special if you can actually come up with 20
exactly.
20 images.
Exactly. So I kind of look at it that way. I said, if I come up with, on a trip for, a couple of days, if I come up with like that Maine trip I was telling you about, I came up with 2 images, I probably shot about 600-700 frames. I came up with 2 images that I'll use in one of my ebooks.
Mm-hmm.
And that I was extremely pleased with. And so from that standpoint, I said, that was a very successful trip, because I have a lot of trips where I go out for a day and I don't come back with, I come back with a couple images I might post on Instagram, but not something I'm going to put on my website or put into one of my books.
Right. And I think it's really difficult too to get to the point where you're actually able, because I wasn't, like this when I started, to be able to sort of be honest with yourself and discern the ones where, like maybe it took a lot of effort to get that. You woke up really early or whatever it was. You drove a long way. You hiked in for 8 miles or something. It's sometimes, I think it's hard to discern the images that, although the experience might be meaningful to you, the image is just not up to the level that maybe the experience was. And it's really, it's almost like you kind of have to go through like some heartbreak sometimes to kind of just level with yourself and just be like, dude, I know that you want this image to be that good, but it just isn't. And, and it took me, I think, a little while before I really started like getting, I think, to a fairly good point of understanding like what that threshold needed to be. And and to just be totally unbiased about it and just be like, I know I came here for this, but is it good enough? And, as an example, have you ever been to Monhegan?
I have not. It's on my list to get out to the island. Yes.
I love it up there.
Yeah.
It's, we had gone a few times, and I always thought, I wonder what this place looks like at sunset and at night. I mean, that was because you can take the day trip, right?
Right.
But the day trip, it's like, you've got between like 11 a.m. and like 3 p.m. It's like, who the hell cares, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's it's like boring light from the top down.
Exactly.
And so I was like, well, I need to get here some other time. So last year we went, and we went for 2 nights. So I didn't get a huge opportunity, but lo and behold, I ended up. So I actually went for Milky Way. I thought I really wanted to try to get like a pano over the entire island of the Milky Way. I'd never seen one before. Okay. So getting back to the point of like trying to get maybe your own ideas for images, Monhegan is not that photographed of a location. So I thought, hey, you can do some stuff here that's really unique to you. And because it's 12 miles off the coast, I'm like, man, I bet the skies there are unbelievable. Well, I got some good Milky Way, good enough, but I just didn't get anything that was that great. The conditions were tough. It was really, really windy.
Okay.
And so to get a foreground to correspond with the Milky Way was hard because, I'm shooting kind of up at the lighthouse and there's just tons and tons of trees below me. And I'm taking these like 4-minute long exposures. So in 4 minutes, it's like, it ends up looking like watercolors or something. It just, It's such a mush. And it wasn't sharp. It just, it didn't make me really feel anything. And so I didn't get the Milky Way photo, but on one of the evenings, this insane, completely Maine kind of storm, it like black as night, but it was gone in 10 minutes.
Okay.
And right at around sunset, which is like, as you probably know, it's like, if the weather is really volatile right before sunset, get outside and get your camera because you may see the most epic, colors or clouds or whatever. And I did it. And I set up at a spot, and as I was like, I think maybe there's a chance here. And I got like some of the most pink, just fog, everything absorbed this pink color. And I ended up getting an image that I won an award for in 2019. Yeah. And it wasn't the reason that I went to Monhegan to get that image, but it was like, I wanted the Milky Way. I didn't get it. I was honest enough to tell myself, look, this is a mediocre Milky Way image and that's fine. But hey, I got something else that was totally unintended and it worked out. Yeah.
And it's probably an image that nobody else got.
Yeah. I was the only photographer that was there. A couple people I remember came out and were just like, because it was like a top 10 sunset probably I've ever seen. Yeah. So I got very lucky.
Yeah.
But, people were coming out and they were just like, oh my God. I mean, it was this like regular non-photographer people that just happened to love it.
Right.
And they kind of saw me shooting and I think they all probably knew like, this guy's going to get something pretty special.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So,
but yeah, it's like, the fact of the matter is I placed that image far above the image that was the whole reason for the trip because it just wasn't that good.
Sure.
Sometimes you just don't get what you want.
Well, wind is like I said, I with a lot of fall foliage and a lot of flower shooting in the summer, wind is a real enemy. And I always coach my students in workshops. I said, let's work on some rules of thumb here. Depending on what the wind velocity is, use your apps and figure out what the wind velocity is and set your shutter speed accordingly. Because otherwise, exactly what you said. Nothing worse than, a beautiful fall scene where all the leaves are blurry.
Yeah. Right. And then of course you go, all right, well, what monster number am I going to have to put my ISO up to here? Because chances are you've got something fairly close and you're shooting relatively wide. And, all of a sudden it's like, I have to be at like F11 here in order for this to work. So now all of a sudden I'm shooting at, 800 ISO and it's like not that dark out. And I'm like,
yeah,
it's frustrating,
Yeah. Fortunately, some of the cameras now can handle the higher ISOs pretty well.
True. What do you shoot these days?
I've always been a Canon guy. So shot for 5 years with a Mark III, and now I'm shooting with a Mark IV. probably, the fact that, I've got good glass, really enjoy my glass, enjoy the Canon system is the reason I stay with it. I know it's not the latest and greatest technology out there, but for landscape photography, it's somewhat bulletproof.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really do feel like the glass is probably the more important thing. I mean, that's kind of the conclusion that I've come to, is like some of the glass is just like, you'd almost buy the glass first, and then this is my favorite lens. Okay, what camera body should I get to accompany this, rather than the other way around?
My favorite saying is that you marry your lenses and you date your bodies.
Right. Yeah.
So just keep changing to a better body, but the glass stays around for a long time.
Did you ever think about maybe trying out one of the like mirrorless Canon stuff, or taking that leap?
Canon's mirrorless has not necessarily got up to a professional level yet. They've got the rumors of this new one that's coming out that was supposed to be released in July.
The R5.
Yeah, I think it is the R5.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I've seen a lot of the video specs on it, but I have not seen any of the still image specs yet. So, and I know it's been delayed because of the virus. So it's supposed to come out, I think, sometime end of June or July, but don't anticipate we'll see it for a bit. So that one looks interesting. I got a lot of friends that shoot Nikon that are extremely pleased with the X6,
the Z series,
Z6 and 7 or whatever. But Canon, they kind of launched at the consumer end, and they having that the new one is really going to be, I think, comparable to the Mark IV, but in the mirrorless. So we'll give that a look when it comes out.
I've got a few buddies that shoot Canon that are like, to say they're psyched about that R5 is like the understatement of the year. Like because I think, like, to be fair, I mean, I don't shoot Canon, although I did at one point. But that R5, like, at least on paper, is just like bananas in terms of specs. Like, it's video and photo specs are just ridiculous. I think it shoots like 8K video or something.
Yes.
And it's not cheap, but it's not expensive relative to.
I don't know that I've seen the projected price on it. I know Canon hasn't released the price yet, but they're projecting it somewhere in the neighborhood of the Mark IV type pricing.
Right.
3,000. Which is, to me, that if I buy a body every 5 years, that's a good investment.
Right. Especially considering all the specs that allegedly it has. It actually does seem like because I mean, what was the one that Nikon released recently that I guess it seems like that was a total flub? It was their new like pro body. I can't remember what it was, but it was like, I just remember it, granted, if you trust YouTube reviews, who knows, but everyone was just bashing that Canon release, or the Nikon release, because it's like a $6,000 camera. And it was kind of like stuff that would have been good, 3 or 4 years ago. So it was kind of like, who's going to buy that?
Right.
Seemed like a questionable release, but I switched to Sony maybe pretty recently, like less than 6 months ago. And I had been shooting Nikon before that. And I really was not sure what to do, because I think I wanted to stay with Nikon, but ultimately the reason that I went to Sony was because I really bought into the mirrorless hype, for better or for worse. Maybe it's totally overrated. I don't know. But I was into that as an idea. And I just thought, Sony is already into the Gen 4 releases of those cameras. And I just thought, maybe the smart thing to do if you want to go mirrorless is to like go with the company that has now released 4 iterations of a camera. So I ended up going the A7R3. I just bought a used one, and it was like, I think, for like barely $2,000. I think, I don't even, may not have even been 2,000. I just thought, I got one with 2,500 shutter actions, and I just thought, this is basically a new camera. Plus it's mirrorless, so I don't even know how degrading a shutter action is on a mirrorless by comparison.
Yeah, true.
But I've been really happy with it so far, and now there's a lot more lenses that are coming out, a lot more third party. You got like Sigma and Tamron really seem to be releasing a lot of good stuff now for reasonable prices. So I'm been pretty high on Sigma lately.
Yes, I shot Sigma for a little bit, doing some astro work. I tried their 20 millimeter art series lens and
Right.
was really pleased with it, but I just don't do enough astro to, put the 12 or $1,300 into a
Right.
fixed lens like that. And I didn't see a lot of difference between that and the sharpness on my regular Canon L series, 1635 zoom. So
Right.
I ended up sending it back and going with a less expensive lens for astro work.
Right.
Just because I don't, I do it, I like it, but it's not something that's front and center in most of my work.
Yeah, and you're right. They have a very particular, because like I was debating maybe getting, Sony came out with a 20 millimeter 1.8 that is like highly regarded.
Yeah.
And but you're right. I mean, it's like, you're paying $1,000 for a prime lens, and you're basically paying for something that's fast and like all those astro things that people worried about, no coma and chromatic aberration and all those like astro related things. But the thing is, like, I already have one that's 2.8 and still pretty sharp, like in that zoom range that you're talking about. So for me, it's almost like I would really only get that for astro time lapse, which, to be fair, like, it's another stop faster. So it's like, well, hey, I can shoot astro at like ISO 3200. It's not that bad. But it's like, other than that, I didn't have much of a purpose. So it's like, as soon as I start making some more money on these time lapses, maybe then I take that leap. But yeah, it is a little redundant.
Yeah, and I try to keep my equipment down to a manageable bag full. So walking around with it, I say, okay, this is my bag, and if it can't all fit in there, it doesn't go on the trip. So
Right.
I'm not going to be carrying 2 bags around. So
right.
I take my telephoto out, my 7300, and put the Ronkinon in, and that's the slight change I make when I go from astro to regular landscape shooting.
Right. What do you use for the moon stuff? Are you using a 70 to 300 for the moon stuff?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And I know it's not optimal, but again, moon is astro, and moon is kind of a secondary for me. So I try to find subjects that are within a mile. I'm not going to be out shooting 2.5 miles away with a 600 millimeter.
Right.
So I look at it and I'll go on PhotoPills and I'll just say, I like this image. I think this one might be a good composition. When's the right month to get this building or this landmark framed by the moon? Okay. Is it within a 1.1 mile reach? Okay, I can get there with my 300 millimeter. If it gets out in the 2 mile range, I know I'm just going to have to crop it down.
Right.
It's going to become too noisy.
Right. Yeah. I moon stuff I haven't really gotten into, and I frankly, I think it's just because I haven't had the appropriate zoom for it. I just haven't had a lens to cater to that. It's like when you start out interested in landscape, I think like the last thing that you kind of tend to pick is like the ultra telephoto lens, right? Like, so it's kind of like the least relevant, I guess.
Yeah.
You always start out with your big, whatever, 16 to 24 or something like that. And then eventually you kind of get up into the 24 to 70 and the 70 to 200s and that kind of thing. But, and that's kind of what I've always had. But, lately, I suppose it's because it's just something that I haven't done that now I'm kind of starting to get the, like, man, I'm kind of interested in, having like the big skyscraper with the moon behind it. But it's like, once you start talking about those lenses, it's like now you're, $2,000 and up, they start getting pretty pricey.
Well, a friend of mine told me, which I thought was good advice. He just said, if you're trying to get a different perspective in landscape, he said, I don't even carry, like that mid-range 40 to 70 millimeter. He said, I don't even carry the 2470 or the 24105 or something like that. He said, I'll just go out and shoot 16 to 24, or I'll shoot 80 millimeters and longer.
Yeah.
And he said, because I either want to bring the audience in, with a 16 millimeter and just, feel like they're sitting on top of the foreground, or I want to compress the image so that they look at a familiar scene and say to themselves, I know that scene, but I don't know it necessarily from that perspective. And if
Right.
I'm shooting with if I'm shooting it with that 24-105, I get lulled into that false sense of shooting it like everybody sees it. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to back off on it and say, okay, I'm at this lighthouse, or I'm at this dune shack, or I'm wherever I'm photographing. Now, I don't want to shoot it at 50 millimeters, because people look at it and say, yeah, and it's a great image, but I've seen that, I've seen exactly that view. So I want to give them something that kind of intrigues them, keeps them looking back saying, boy, I know that lighthouse, but I don't necessarily know it from that particular angle. Like I was on my little main trip the other day, I was at Portland Head Light, and, only 17 million people have
Right.
shot that,
Right.
And so I said, and it was a kind of an overcast day with some interesting clouds. So I said, I can shoot this, but I'm not going to go north of the lighthouse or south of the lighthouse and shoot it across the wonderful cliffs and stuff like that. I'm going to just walk around this whole site for an hour and see if I can find a perspective that, I haven't seen before. And I ended up walking up on some of the paths, and, I came up on an image where, I was looking down a flight of stairs from kind of the top tier there.
Okay.
Looking down a flight of stairs with the lighthouse kind of at the end of the flight of stairs, and the trail that goes down to the lighthouse with the ocean in the background. So I was able to almost to shoot straight down at it with really the stairway and the staircase and the path as wonderful leading lines with the lighthouse in the background. I got more comments, on that. I mean, Down East Magazine sent me a note. The photo editor, said, I've shot this 100 times and I've never seen it shot from there. I said,
That's really,
that's the biggest
very
compliment
cool.
I can get. So
yeah, that's Benjamin Williamson, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, Ben's
Yeah.
a great photographer. So when somebody gives me that kind of kudos, I go, okay, I accomplished my objective.
Yeah, agreed. Some of his images are really, really powerful. And I agree. I actually did see the image on your Instagram when you posted it. And that is a nice one. And it's not one that I had seen before. And I think, just, I guess, to get back to that subject, like, that is so hard to do. And I often think, like, it's almost like that's the equivalent of if you're a songwriter and you write a song that actually doesn't follow this chord progression that's been done 1,000 times, which is, and as somebody who is a musician, or at least, used to be a musician, I guess, like, that's really hard to do. It's hard because most things that you find to be pleasing auditory wise, the let's go from this chord to that chord, and you feel something and that was nice. Like, they've all been done before. So it's really, really hard to write a song that's so unique. And I think it's the same thing with photography. It's so hard to do. I probably the hardest thing, because, anyone can just learn the function of cameras, and everyone can understand, like, although it's a pain in the ass, everyone can learn, like, depth of field and hyperfocal distance and stuff like that. And it's a boring subject, but you can learn that. But it's just totally different when you just have the eye to be able to say, yeah, I see what everyone else has done, but I'm going to do this other thing. And it's still going to evoke that nice, powerful feeling of seeing an image. And yet it's going to be something that no one else has done before. Like, that's so hard to do.
Yeah. And I don't profess to do it that often. So, but I do tell, like, my workshop students, I say, so many people get frozen into an image in their mind.
Right.
And then they go to a site, and back to your comment about Shane Bloom, is that he doesn't look at sites because he doesn't want to have his mind filled with images. He wants to kind of look at it fresh. And what I approach it a little bit different way. I said, hey, you may only be at this place once, so get the iconic scene.
Sure.
Shoot that. Don't deprive yourself of shooting that particular location from something that you really will appreciate yourself. But I said, at that point, I said, when I go to a location, it's not unusual for me to come home with 12 to 15 different perspectives of almost the same scene, because I'm constantly moving around. I know if the light changes, I can go back to the iconic location. but I'm looking at it saying, how do I continue to move? Sometimes, 15 feet, sometimes 100 feet, just to give myself totally different perspectives on that particular scene. Because I found that when I get back home, I actually have a better eye on the computer than I do through the viewfinder.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
I go with a thought in mind on what I want the composition to look like. And I would say more than half the time, Adam, I come home and a different composition, once I get it online, once I do post-processing, strikes me, and ends up being a more favorite image from that particular location.
Isn't it funny how that works? Sometimes you're so convinced this whatever you saw on the back of the camera was X or Y, and then you bring it up on the computer and you're like, oh, it's just massively uglier, or massively, you underrated it when you saw it at first. It's like, I guess that's the nature of just trying to discern a good image or not from a screen that's like, that big.
Right.
It's really hard to do. Or even, just find mistakes like, oh, I missed, I was relatively in focus, but it wasn't like tack sharp. It wasn't critical focus. And then you see that, once you get back to, especially if you're focusing manually. That's the easiest way to just barely miss something. And it's like, when you know how sharp your lens can be, and then you see something and you're like, it's good, but it's just not
soft.
And then like, it happens to me all the time.
Well, I kind of, now I've incorporated certain things into my, that I do automatically. So I know if I'm going to go wide, I'm almost always going to focus stack,
Right.
I'm always, if I'm looking at the histogram and I can't fit that whole histogram in, I know I'm going to do, some type of blending, on one or two particular images.
Right.
And so I kind of already have that in my preset game plan. So then I can kind of discount all that and say, it's almost automatic. I'll get to a different composition and I'll say, okay, I know I have to do A, B, or C, because I know I don't want to come back with soft focus. I know I don't want to come back with blown highlights. I know I got to, I know I've got these things that I've got to do because I already know about these conditions. And as a result, I think that just comes with experience, just shooting, as they say, your first 10,000 images are throwaways. So,
right.
And I find myself now being able to move through a scene, move through a location a lot quicker because a lot of things are on automatic.
Yeah. Sometimes I think too, it's like almost a little bit of muscle memory of like genre. So like I find that if I skip around to a couple different things, like I'll shoot like real estate, or sometimes I'll shoot like headshots and stuff for some money. And I find that like, if I get into this headspace of real estate, like I'm kind of shooting it the way you're supposed to shoot real estate. And then if I go back over to landscape, it's like I'm thinking about it differently. And it's kind of, you have to like reacclimate to that stuff. Like one example I've always noticed, like with wedding photography, it's like blow out all the highlights.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
everything
in wedding photography is just white. Just make everything white. And as long as the skin tones are basically at the highest exposure without blowing them out at all, it's like, that's kind of what you want to do. And every time I look at wedding photos from like the landscape photographer perspective, I'm like, well, where the hell's the sky? It's like, well, we don't do that here. We don't need the sky. All we want is like the facial expression as highly exposed as possible. And I always find that kind of funny that like, how did some of these cliches even develop? Why is it that like, if you're shooting weddings, it's like, it's not about the scenery really much at all. It's just about, the face and the skin kind of. I'm probably not being fair about the genre, but it does seem that way.
But your point is exactly right. And sometimes you adopt some of those things. Like I'll go out, as I mentioned, I'll do a lot of photography down on Cape Cod. And there's just days there that there's nothing in the sky. It's just blank, high overcast clouds.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, I will actually incorporate that into, much more of a high key look to some particular images. So I'll use that and shoot some dories, or I'll shoot some lobster boats, or, I'll shoot some scenes there, and I'll shoot them strictly from a high key, and I'll really accentuate the color of the dory or the color of the lobster boat or whatever.
Right.
Totally different look than a lot of my landscape images if I'd had a sky. But since I had no sky, I said, you know what, I'm going to take it out and almost just let the boat or the dory or whatever sit on it like it was sitting on a blank canvas.
Right.
And
right.
to your point, the wedding is somewhat the same thing. I don't want to be distracted by the sky, because all I want to see is the bride or the groom or the celebration. And I don't want to be distracted from that, from that beautiful couple or whatever. And so some of those thoughts you can take forward right into some type of landscape photography.
Yeah. It really took me a while. Like I fought that a lot when I would do like different genres of things, because it was almost like my logic for how a photo should be taken was almost always based on how a landscape photo should be taken. And I remember, like, when I first started doing real estate, or when I started doing any kind of like environmental portraits, it was always like, I need to get the histogram as close to the middle as I possibly can. I need to save my blacks and I need to save my whites. And it was like, yeah, that's just not what you do if you're incorporating people or again, even real estate into the scene. It's like, it needs to look almost nuclear in its exposure. And yeah, if you blow highlights, it's just whatever, just put that white slider all the way up. It doesn't matter. But I always remember thinking like, but that's a mistake. I always thought, but that's not right. And it's like, you realize that, right and wrong can actually be subjective depending upon like what you're shooting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's, to me, I always try to maybe push the edges of what the atmosphere of the photo is giving me. So especially, when I post it on Instagram, I want to have something that kind of pops, and
right.
And people will come back to me and say, I'd like to buy that image or whatever. I go, that's fine, but let me send you the image, the actual image,
right.
In a thumbnail, so you can look at it, because it might look slightly different,
right.
slightly less vibrant or slightly less high key, when you see the actual image. So I don't want you to base it totally on, what I'm putting out there, because I put it out there to have some pop and to have a little bit of, sizzle to it, so that it catches people's eye on a really small screen. But if you're going to make this into a 24 by 36 and put it over your couch, you don't want, the level of saturation, or you don't want the level of brightness that, maybe I put on it to launch it on Instagram.
That's really interesting that you say that, because I struggle with like, what's the solution to that problem a lot. I never really thought about just saying, hey, I can do this, but here's more likely what it's going to look like. It's hard, it's hard to like edit for what you believe is like right versus edit for what you believe, is like Instagram. I mean, I can't tell you how many times like I would edit a photo and it would look how I thought it needed to look, and then I'd put it on Instagram and it was like, and I guess maybe it's just in comparison to everything else. It's like, there's not enough contrast. The whites aren't popping, the blacks aren't popping, like the color's not that. But I felt like when I edited it, it was good. You know what I mean? And then you put it up there and it's like, it's so forgettable, because it's just like, and I think that there's two like forms of offending that. There's people that it's just like, they put the saturations up so high that where you're like, okay, this is like a joke. Like there's not even a conversation worth having. This is just like tragically bad. But then there's also like, there's saturation to where it still kind of looks okay, but it's still too much. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's like, I mean, do you, so you would say that you pretty much edit like twice? You kind of, you edit for social media, and then you edit for just,
well, I edit, obviously Lightroom and Photoshop I use, and I edit it. And then I'll send it to myself and put it on my phone.
Right.
And then I edit it again in Snapseed.
Oh, okay. And that's what goes to Instagram.
And that's what goes to Instagram.
Interesting.
Sometimes I make, minor tweaks. Sometimes I push it a little bit to the limit.
Uh-huh.
I think I've gotten a little bit more conservative. I probably started out, many years ago on Instagram, kind of pushing it beyond the limit because people tend to like it. You
Right.
would get the feedback from it, and
Right.
people would like that, kind of over the top look. And I've said to myself, I need to scale that back so that I kind of take it to the limit and then pull back 10 or 15%, so
Right.
that it still has maybe some vibrancy or some, some aspect of it, tends to pop a little bit more on the small screen. I would never print that particular level of image, or I would never, put that in an electronic competition.
Mm-hmm.
But because the screen is so small, I can push it just to catch eyeballs. And
Right.
I use Instagram a lot for business purposes.
Of course.
It's my main marketing activity. And so when I launch an ebook or when I launch a tour or whatever, I want people to notice that particular print, or notice that particular image, so they stop and read what's below, in the commentary.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. And I do think it's probably one of the most difficult things out there is that, I guess a lot of it just comes with experience of understanding that, like, what is on Instagram is not necessarily realistic. And even, to your point, I think a lot of the very best photographers out there, they do some version of that. Like they understand that, like, they're pushing stuff further that ends up on Instagram. And I think that a lot of them would tell you, like, oh, I would never really do this. It's like, it's like this necessary evil with social media or whatever.
Well, I follow, like we were talking about Ben earlier from down east. You look at his prints and they're pushed, vibrancy or saturation. They're pushed, but they're pushed tastefully.
Right.
And you would never look at his editing and say he's pushed it too far, but
right.
You would also look at it and say, wow, that's just an outstanding, image in terms of contrast and shadows and
pop and
vibrancy and whatever. And there's a real art to that. And I admit I'm not there yet. And that's what I'm working toward. I'm really working more and more on my post-processing. And a lot of times I'll go back now and look at some of my older images and redo them. Just
right.
I've got better skills now than I did 2 or 3 years ago when I originally processed it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I try to do that as well. Sometimes I lose my patience because I'm like less inspired because it's an older thing. But you really should, because it's like, who's to say that a picture you took 5 years ago isn't one of the best photos you've ever taken? It's just that you just didn't know how to edit for your life. And now all of a sudden, you do, maybe. But yeah, I think that the learning how to get the most out of an image and getting it all the way up to that point and no further is really, really hard. It's really tough to know when to stop it, especially when I think a lot of photographers these days are like, the signpost to them for what a good image isn't coming from like a formal photography education, or it's not coming from like an aesthetic of a good image in the traditional sense. I think a lot of people are inspired to take photographs based on Instagram. And so you kind of go into it with this idea that, well, this is what images that people like and could make me money or go viral. This is what they look like. And so I think it's really hard to even get to that point of realization of like, oh, what I'm editing is, it's like if you talk to some of the guys, the legacy photographers that have been doing this for a long time, it's like, they're going to know, like, they're going to say like, almost like, oh, you're an Instagram photographer versus a photographer. And it's like, you could still be an amazing photographer, but it's like hard to make that adjustment of like, I'm going to push that as much as I can, but still at least in the genre of like real. And and not beyond that. That's like, it's really hard to do that, I think.
Yeah, especially, and Instagram is just filled with sunrise and sunset shots.
Yeah.
So, why? Because of the color. And so I tend to, not that I won't shoot a great sky at sunrise or sunset, but I'm also looking for more interesting weather. Because a lot of times, people are wowed by the sunrise or the sunset, but the picture itself isn't really that interesting.
Right.
And so what I try to do is go to interesting locations, and then I try to find interesting weather. If I get a great sunrise or sunset, wonderful. It adds window dressing to it. But I don't want people to come away saying, I don't even know what the scene was, but it was a wonderful sunrise.
Right. Oh, it was pink. It's like,
Yeah.
It was more than that. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm always, looking for that storm that you were talking about. I'm looking for foggy mornings. I'm looking, I would much rather do the Maine coast on a foggy morning than I would on a beautiful sunrise. One,
right,
because it's going to provide a lot more intrigue and a lot more mystery and a lot more story to the photograph. And two, I'm probably going to be able to shoot it for 3 or 4 hours in many different locations where the sunrise is one and done, in 15, 20 minutes.
Fog is great, man. I mean, coming from, like, I live in, outside the Philadelphia area. And like, we don't really get fog. Every once in a while, it'll be just that right dew point where we'll get some fog, but it's not, we don't live in a place for fog. It's like, I'm often more attracted to taking photos, I guess, of the weather that I don't typically get. And fog is one of them. I've always really been interested in taking photos and especially time lapses of like cloud inversions, because we don't get that here.
Yeah.
But it's like, you see these guys up in San Francisco that go up to, near the Golden Gate, and they're shooting down. You get this, like, these time lapses of this, like, waves of fog. And I'm like, oh my God, that is the coolest thing ever. I love stuff like that. Or I don't know if you've heard of Mike Olbinski. He's like one of the bigger, like, storm chaser guys. He lives in, I think, Arizona. I'm actually trying to get him on the podcast, but we're just having trouble meeting up. But he's like one of my favorite storm photographers. And I think, like, when I first got into photography, I got into it because I saw a Milky Way photo. Okay. And I saw it and I was just like, holy shit, really? This can happen? I had no idea. I didn't even know this was a thing. And now, I mean, I still love to shoot it, but after now doing it a lot, now I'm kind of like, well, what's the thing that excites me the most? And now I look at some of these storm photos where they've got, like, the entirety of the cell in this wide shot. And, maybe the cell is happening around sunset. So you've got the cell and you've got lightning and you've got the orange of the sunset. And I'm just like, this is absurd. So, now I'm like, that's kind of what's turning my brain on the most, is like, God, I'd love to get a shot like that,
Yeah. And Philly's probably not the right place for it. So
no.
Yeah.
Not at all.
A good friend of mine that I've taken a couple workshops with, Nick Page, he lives out in out in the Palouse. And he's constantly chasing, weather out in the Palouse, out in eastern Washington. And he just put one on about, maybe 2 weeks ago. And it was a scene that he and I had been to. I know exactly, the grain silo and the old dilapidated house in the foreground. I said,
right.
I know exactly where you shot that from. And I mean, he had this weather cell there. It was just as you described it. I mean, circular, black, multiple layers, rainbow on the side, with a lightning bolt coming down through the middle. And I said, I don't think we're going to get that image anytime soon in Massachusetts.
Right. So. Yeah. That Wizard of Oz level scene. What the hell? How do I compete with that? That's funny too. I'm actually working on getting Nick on the show as well. I love how, every post that he has always has the false location.
Mesa Arch.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a wonderful photographer and a great educator.
Yeah. And clearly doesn't want to give his positions away as well, which I think respect.
A lot of people don't. So I respect that. So
yeah.
I always sometimes will ask somebody, but I usually direct message them and say, hey, no problem. If you can give me that location, wonderful. If not, I certainly understand.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, especially in light of like how I think in a lot of ways Instagram is screwing up the planet a little bit. You know, you hear about some of these iconic locations and like, you know, you've got your photographer subgenre of Instagrammer, and then you have your like, you know, influencer subgenre. And it's like, you know, you see all these people walking all over the lavender fields in France or walking
Oh,
all
yeah.
over the poppies in California. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I suppose on one hand, you don't want to give the location away because you just want this to be your own unique shot. And that makes sense. But on the other hand, it's like, yeah, we don't need that shit anymore. We don't need all these people stomping on all these things that need to be protected, you know, just so that they can get a shot of them, you know, going like this or
Yeah.
whatever cliche thing they're doing. And it does get frustrating seeing all that stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the world we live in. I mean, you tap on any location in Instagram, you know, when somebody puts a location on it and you tap on it to kind of see where it is. And, you know, the first 40 images on there are selfies. And then,
Right.
and then finally you see one that's another landscape image where you go,
Right.
oh, that's what it looks like. But I had to filter through, you know, 40 selfies to get to another image to, you know, see what the location looked like.
It's hard to compete with attractive women on the internet. It's not, you know, I talk about that with some of my buddies sometimes. It's like, man, like all the thousands of dollars of gear, the thousands of hours, the sitting in the rain, like getting no sleep. And it's like, you know, you finally get this one shot and you're like, wow, I'm so proud of it. Post. And it's like, oh, I got, you know, 500 likes. Like that's pretty good. And then, you know, right, you go to that same location and right above that is a, you know, a chick in a bikini and it's, you know, 8 million likes. And it's like, oh man, what am I supposed to, how do I compete with that? You know?
Yeah, you talked about the lavender fields in Valensole in Provence. I mean, I've been there a couple of times to shoot, and you literally can't shoot the fields because tour buses show up with people with multiple outfit changes.
Right.
And they're
Right.
literally in the field for hours shooting selfies.
Right.
With 4 or 5 different outfits. And I'm, you know, so you're just like, all I want to do is shoot this one image. Can you just clear out of the way for just 3 minutes while I shoot it? And then you can go back to, you know, shooting your parasol, you know, with your hat on top. And
right.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. I don't want to be a hater because it's just a silly thing to hate on, but it's like, oh God, it's so frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
My speaking of the you know, shielding your location, I actually, one of my friends who's a Philly photographer was just telling me the other day, it's like, it's really crazy, you know, the amount of copying that other photographers will do sometimes, where he has a couple of compositions where he would do like an Instagram story when he was there. And he said, oh, you know, I'm going to go for a big moon shot, and I'm going to shoot it at like, you know, 800 mil with a 2x converter. And it's, you know, it's going to be gigantic and blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to wait until it gets right over here. And, you know, he'll do that and he'll take the shot. And the very next day he told me, he's like, there's these 2 photographers. I'm not going to mention any names, but he's like, there's these 2 photographers and they upload the image that's almost exactly the same as the one that I was doing my Instagram story about the day before. So the next day, you know, because the moon doesn't change that much between one night and the next, right? So if he was shooting a crescent or something, it's still a crescent the following day. Okay. And, you know, maybe you only need to adjust your footing slightly because it's in roughly the same spot.
Right.
And he was like, dude, you know, I had to block these 2 people because it was like, this was like the 5th time in a row where I was just talking about how I was shooting this thing. And the very next day they, you know, had the exact same photo. I'm like, man, it's such a weird thing too, because it's like, they're not stealing, you know, like they're not doing anything criminal. There's no, you know, it's nothing that bad. It's just kind of a scummy thing to do where it's like, really? You're just going to, you just.
Yeah, I can't get too worried about that stuff. You know, life's too short. So I look at it. And in fact, if I shoot an image that I've seen from somebody else, I'll usually put
like
their
tag
name.
them in it or something.
Yeah, I'll tag them in. I posted one this morning, and I said, I wanted to shoot this image, and I tagged the guy. I said, I saw it on his particular feed and loved it. So kudos to you. I don't think I did as good a job as you did, but thanks for the inspiration.
That's cool. Yeah. And I would imagine, I mean, a lot of people on Instagram are very nice and a lot more approachable than you might think. Some of these people that have tons and tons of followers. I'll tell you, when the quarantine started, this whole podcast thing was really weird. I mean, I've only really been doing it since March, or maybe the beginning of April. I can't remember.
Okay.
And I started it, because I knew that I'm a very like ADHD person, like criminally ADHD. And I knew that if I didn't find some sort of creative outlet on some level during this quarantine, that I was going to go absolutely crazy. Because I knew I wasn't going to shoot, at least for a while. I mean, you remember how fearful everything was in April. Yeah. I mean, it was like, you didn't want to go outside to get the mail. It's like you were scrubbing down the mail when you brought it in the house. It was really like a crazy time. It still is crazy, but it's different now. And so I got one of my friends who has a decent amount of followers and is my friend anyway. And I said, dude, let's do this stupid podcast. I've wanted to do one for a while. Why don't we do a Zoom call? And we basically just got drunk. We just drank beers and we just talked about photography. And it was, when I was done, I thought, this is fun. And so I started reaching out to random people on Instagram, photographers that frankly, I have no business interviewing. It's not like I'm a journalist or anything. And I was shocked at how many of these guys were like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. They didn't have a prerequisite. It wasn't how many followers, what's your YouTube audience. It wasn't anything like that. It was just like, yeah, okay. And it was like that those first couple of months, my hit rate was like 1 out of 3 people, people that have hundreds of thousands or even millions of followers that are like, I'm down to do this. I just have to figure out, when. Some of them I'm still kind of waiting on, but they essentially said yes. And I was so like shocked and in a good way at how accessible a lot of photographers and creative people were, like much more accessible than I thought. And granted, maybe part of that is I don't have anything to do anyway. All my stuff has been canceled. But, when I started getting the Shane Blooms and the Peter Hurleys and the Michael Sadovskis and people like that, where I'm just like, I can't believe this guy said yes. Like some of my other photographer friends are like, just like, really, that person's going to be on? Like, how did you do that? And the truth is, like, all I did was I would just send people a nice message and I'd say, I like your work. And, if you've got a couple hours, why don't you do it? And it's really been a really cool thing. It's been a very bizarre and very cool experience. This whole thing from the first one, from Emmerich, to Dave Long and, any of the other people that are still yet to do it.
Well, I mean, I love podcasts. I mean, I have a bunch of them and that I listen to. And I mean, not necessarily just photography podcasts, but they're a great tool. I mean, I can tell you, being a landscape photographer, I do a lot of driving. And I mean, I'd much rather listen to an hour and a half podcast with guys talking about photography than an hour and a half podcast of, just the same regurgitated news.
Right.
And so you're always looking for subjects that are pertinent and interesting to you from people that you respect. And so I really applaud the fact that you started this, because frankly, there were some really good podcasts on photography that I think have kind of lost their way and don't publish just people talking about photography. They tend to get, too, esoteric on the subjects at hand. And sometimes the audience just wants to sit around and listen to people talk about, what they love to do and get it from a perspective of people that obviously have some really great skills.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for saying that. That's nice of you to say. And I it sounds like we're kind of coming from the same ideology here, in that, like, one of the things that I really like about podcasts, because I listen to my share of them as well, is that it's everything these days. Like you mentioned, the news and just shows in general, I suppose, are made up of these very, like, there's always an ulterior motive, or there's always like, it's just sort of a quick soundbite. It's like, hey, it's like listening to like politics nowadays, where it's just like, all right, candidate number 7, like, give your 30-second response on how we solve some giant issue. And it's like, it's not, they're not even going to be able to answer that question in 30 seconds. It's just not possible. So you get this diet version of a question that is far more complicated and has way more resolution than one can illustrate in 30 seconds. And so I remember, listening to podcasts and thinking, this is so great to be able to hear, 2 or more people have a discussion, and no one is going to be able to bullshit anyone, because you are in a way kind of trapped with this person. And if somebody kind of gives you this boilerplate answer, you can dive into that. So you're going to find out pretty quickly what someone's real, honest, and rational opinion is on something. And you can't just take this one little soundbite and then kind of put this person in a corner and say, well, you're the person that said that. It's like, no, you listen to it and you realize that all of the kind of divisiveness that we have in the world today, people are not as spread apart as kind of the media, let's say, would make you think. People, when you really sit down with somebody and you listen to somebody talk, and you listen to them go on tangents about one thing, or it's a fluid conversation, like in a podcast, you start to get a feel for how does this person actually think. And I think that's very liberating, to when you can have somebody come on and you go, I really feel like I kind of know this person now.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. And that's the feel I get from a good podcast is, when I can walk away and say, that was an hour well spent. I really like this person's work. Now I kind of like this person and their philosophy on photography. And, usually even at my level, I'm picking up 2 or 3 things that I'm going to incorporate in, to some things I'm going to try the next time I'm out.
Yeah. It really is something that I know it's kind of hokey to say, oh, you never stop learning, but it's like, man, the more I learn, the more I know I don't know. It's amazing. Every realization is 2 questions.
And I tell people when I go on workshops, when I run workshops, I don't even usually take my equipment out of my bag. I'm just walking around, listening to their questions, listening to how they're thinking about the particular scene. And I get, it's just great fun to get 10 or 12 photographers out and have them all talking, about a subject that we all care for, and kind of getting everybody's perception that's always a little bit different, and kind of molds, what you're doing going forward.
Yeah. Do you have any photographers that, are kind of your favorites, or people that you just continue to be blown away by, like, God, like here this person goes again with another one that is amazing? Like,
yeah, I've got some local ones. I'm not real good with names. So I'd probably have to look them up on Instagram, but I've got 4 or 5 photographers locally in New England that really do an exceptional job. I've got 2 or 3, that I look at, globally.
Right.
What I tend to do is, if I'm going someplace, I tend to do a deep dive on really good photographers in that particular area, because I really use that as my scouting mechanism. And so I follow about 400 people, I guess, on Instagram, something like that. But it's always changing.
Right.
Because if I'm going to go to Japan in November, hopefully, I'm going to go in and find, some feeder sites and some really good photographers in Japan. And I'm going to follow them for 6 months and kind of see, locations that they shoot and match that up with locations I'm going to go, and, see if I can get a good map done. When I was in Holland last year, I followed 3 or 4 photographers there, and kind of got my, I literally was there for 8 days and had a full solid 8 days of shooting from doing nothing except scouting on Instagram.
Right. Well, you said you had what? I think you said 4,000
Yeah.
shots is what you took.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a hefty dose of shooting.
Yeah. I mean, and the beauty of that is most people are friendly. So, I'll go into something and I'll say, hey, I love this particular image. I'm coming over to Holland in a month. Would you mind if, telling me exactly what that image or where that image is? And I'd say 80% of the time they're very friendly and say, yeah, this is the location, and give me the coordinates or give me the town, or, give me, however I might find it. And,
right.
And then I'd just map it out on Google My Maps and literally have it on my phone and navigate around, put plans together, for different days, check the weather. Okay, this is going to be a good sunrise day. I think I'll go down and do the windmills on this particular day. This looks like it's a clear day. I think I'll spend it, doing nighttime photography in Amsterdam or whatever. And you can kind of gear around, the different flow based on what you think the conditions are going to be.
It is interesting. Like the times, there's always this like push and pull, at least in my head, and presumably for a lot of people, of like, do I really want to ask this person? Aren't I just going to bother them? And like, but often I think when you do just ask, it's surprising how positive the responses are that you get. And I remember having this conversation with my friend, Kevin Green, who's an LA, photographer. He does a lot of time-lapse stuff, but he's had a few viral, single images. Maybe you saw one of them. One of them was this image that he did. It was a Milky Way image from, I don't exactly know my locations of LA very well, but it was like one of those like in the hills overlooking LA kind of places. And he had, so he was doing the Milky Way. And then this was maybe like, it was a few years back. Do you know those like inflatable T-Rex costumes that you always see people wear with little arms and like you kind of look through the mouth? So he was like, I wanted to make this like silly image of this T-Rex, my friend in a T-Rex costume, like overlooking the hills of the Milky Way. And it was going to be funny, but also potentially, a good shot. This was like before everyone was wearing that costume, when it was like still kind of cool. And so he's, I guess, kind of, almost doing like test shots. Like he's like, okay, hold still. And he's taking these like 15, 20-second exposures. And as he's taking these photos, his friend like sends him a message, his other photo friend somewhere in LA. And he sends him a text like, yo, did you just see that bolide? Like the huge, meteor, they're called bolides. They're like very rare meteors that are like enormous. They leave like a little smoke trail behind them as they enter the atmosphere. And he says, no. And so he's randomly looking through the photos that he took, and he's like, I've got this picture of this silly T-Rex in this perfect pose with the Milky Way and a bolide flying across the sky. And and it ended up being this like hugely viral image. It made like the front page of Reddit, and it was, it was just one of those images that he got a bunch of comeuppance for, like tens of thousands of followers overnight or something.
That's fun.
But the point is that like, when he said about that location and a few of these other locations were because he just asked somebody, I think one of them, he wanted to get the moon was just in this perfect spot and it could only really be shot from this person's deck in their yard.
Yeah.
And he went up to their house and he said, listen, I know this is going to sound a little weird. I'm not a crazy person. I'm a photographer and I take these viral images, and your back deck has this perfect vantage point for this shot that I have been waiting. Like, this is a shot that you can get like every 5 years.
Yeah.
This is the spot that I need to get it from. I'll order you pizza. I'll buy you a case of beers, whatever. Is there any way I can just sit up on your deck tonight and we'll hang out or whatever? And can I shoot this? And the person was like totally cool with it. They're like, really? I mean, they almost felt empowered by the fact that going to have to take it from my yard. All right. It's like almost this cool thing. And he always says that, like, dude, if you've got a shot that like it's going to require X or Y, like just ask the person. And if you're nice enough, like most people they'll give you the benefit of the doubt,
Yeah, no, I learned, I didn't learn it in high school, that, all she can say is no. So, so,
Right.
so eventually, by the time I became old and a landscape photographer, I finally said, all they can say is no. So a lot of times they say yes. And you come away with images that are, just as you described.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite of your images, or is that too difficult to nail down?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I've got some favorites. I always come back to some of my Iceland images.
Mm.
The Raina's Dranger, the Black Sand Beach,
Mm-hmm.
last year, at midnight, with, a couple guys, climbing up on some rocks and kind of looking out, turned out to be my favorite image of last year. And that one just sticks in my mind. It's one of those where I was looking through the viewfinder and I shot probably 20 images, and there were three guys, that were kind of wonderfully positioned up on these sea stacks, looking out over this black sand beach. And I just kept shooting it, almost, and there, it was, probably at 200 millimeters.
Yeah.
So I couldn't say anything to him because the ocean roar and the distance away. And I kept saying under my breath, just move a little to the right, just
Right.
move. And finally one guy moved just exactly where, and I shot it. And it was one of those times where I just said, that's going to be my favorite image of the year. I mean, immediately,
That's cool.
even before I started processing it. And it's turned out to be, a favorite image. So yeah, I usually go through and do my top 10 for the year and
Mm-hmm.
kind of keep track, cull them all down. And it's always a hard pick even to get down to your top, 5 or 10 images of the year. So
Right. And it
really
changes
tough
so
to,
frequently, doesn't it?
yeah, really tough to get down to your favorite image.
Yeah. Sometimes I find it hard because it just feels like the new stuff that I do is almost always better than the old stuff. I always feel like that happens, and it's not always the case, because every once in a while I'll look back at some older stuff and I'll be like, man, that really was a good one. I don't give that one enough credit.
Yeah.
Like I have this one Milky Way shot that I did a couple of years ago, and it's just a great composition. I've got the sort of, it was one in Maine, and it's kind of got the leading lines of the rocks kind of going up towards the Milky Way. It kind of aligns with the trees. And it's just one of those things where it feels good. But I also wasn't as good at shooting the Milky Way at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of don't know exactly what I know now. Now I have a star tracker, so now I'm not
Beautiful.
limited to 15 or 20 seconds. Now I take 4-minute exposures to extract this crazy detail out of it. So I didn't have the ability to do it then, but it's just one of those things where it's like, it just doesn't matter. It's like, if you have a good composition, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that, like, hey, maybe the nebulosity and some of those colors of the Milky Way and the dark lanes aren't quite as great. The fact of the matter is, it's just a good picture. But that, I think that's more rare for me. I think a lot of the times it's like, if it's newer, I kind of, right or wrong, I kind of rank it higher, maybe because it's just fresh or something.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. I do have a set of images. In 2015, I did photography of the cormorant fishermen down in the Li River Valley in China. And I keep going back to that file. And I just said, I just had absolutely, I photographed it at sunset. I photographed it at dawn. And I photographed it the next day at blue hour. 3 different fishermen.
Right.
In the Li River with the karst mountains in the background, and I
Wow.
keep going back to that set of series, and every time I pull one of those out and edit a new image from there, I put it into a competition, or I put it into some type of social media, and it just goes crazy, and because that tends to be, I had perfect conditions, perfect setting. Everything worked out. So I will go back to that every so often and say, is there still an image here I haven't mined yet? And
yeah,
that is a little bit different than, maybe what I've already worked on. And it's always kind of fun to go back, because like music or anything else, you go back to a favorite image, and it kind of immediately takes you back to that.
Oh man,
place.
That's a great call. That's so true. It's like I have my favorite artists, musically speaking, favorite bands and things of that nature. And you'll listen to the hell out of it, and then you won't even touch it for like 3 years. And then one day you're on like a road trip, and yeah, maybe I'll put some Led Zeppelin on. I haven't, I've listened to every Led Zeppelin obviously, but it's like, I'll put that on. And all of a sudden it's like, it just hits you right there. You're on the road and you're by yourself, and it's maybe a little emotional or something, and that right song, right time. And all of a sudden I'm like, man, I'm all up for the Led Zeppelin again. And now I'm listening to every album over the next few days. And
yep.
it is funny how cyclical things like that can be.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I was just, went off on, started a trip, and I put my phone in, jacked it in. I was just starting to look at a podcast, but I had to get my map coordinates set. So my iTunes file came on, and totally random, pulled a song from 1967 and pulled a song from 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And there were two of my favorite songs. And for like 7 minutes, I was transported back to when I was 14 years old, and just 4 years ago. And I just said, wow, nothing pulls it out like music.
Right. Oh man, it's so true. It's so true. For as much as photography is 100% my thing nowadays, I mentioned earlier that like I used to play music. I mean, I really was obsessed with playing music. I wanted that to work out more than anything I've ever wanted to work out. And I don't know if that makes me at my core more of a musician than a photographer. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Or if there's just something about music that's it just pulls you more than other things. But it really, really is powerful. Like the amount of obsession and the amount of effort that I put in for those years of doing anything I could to just try to, to write music that I liked. And it's like fighting with other people about what decision to make of which chord we should go to. It just like everything. It was so, but I always felt like the moment that you finished a song was really kind of the only thing that maybe I could think could be more of a climactic moment of finishing a project would be like an actual film, like creating a movie. I think that could probably surpass that in terms of the feeling of accomplishment. But in my own experience, there was always something about finishing up a song, and not just one that you just finished, but one that you're like, I really like this song that I wrote. Was just like, emotionally, I think that was the most complete that I could ever feel, was that category.
Well, I mean, the good news there is you did something that 99% of the rest of the people have and can't do.
Right. That's true.
Can't even, I love music, but if you ask me how anybody could create a song, I'm baffled. Let alone play it beautifully. And, if they've got a voice, I sit in awe of people that write a song, have wonderful guitar skills or piano skills or whatever it happens to be. And they've got, a wonderful voice. I'm just like, man, are you freaking kidding me? How do you put all those things and then be able to put it together?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that too, because like in terms of just like raw talent, I never really felt like I had that much raw talent as a photographer. I always felt like with photography, it was more like I saw some images and I thought, wow, I'd love to be able to do that. And then I kind of got bit by the bug, and it was like, I just kept watching and listening and reading and watching and listening and reading and trying and trying and trying. And it was almost like I had to trick my brain into thinking that it was a photographer brain or something. Cause I never felt like, oh, I'm a photographer. Do you know what I mean? It just never felt like I just could kind of walk outside and like kind of just know what to do in the way that I felt like a musician. Like as a musician, it was just like I had stuff in my head and I just knew what to do. I like I could listen to music even like when I was little, and I just knew what was happening. I was like, here's what the bass is doing. Here's what the drum's doing. Here's the hi-hat. Here's the guitar. Here's the second guitar. Here's the sax. It was just like, it was just sort of natural and easy for me. And I don't think that photography came to me in that same way. So I don't know that I'm as visual of an artist, but for that reason, maybe I'll never be as good of a photographer as I am a musician, but I also really enjoy it. And I don't know, maybe you really can learn to do it, be sort of an artist if you just kind of force yourself to keep doing it. Cause I like doing it and I know I'm a lot better than I was like 4 years ago. So.
No, I think you can, whether you get to be one of the best or not who cares, as long as you continue to get better. And I think that's one of the things I tell people is, on workshops or, people that consult with me, I said, understand that, you can get better at that, because they'll be always asking me questions on how I do certain techniques or how I get certain shots or whatever. And I go,
yeah,
guys, it's not like I've been doing this since I was, 10 years old. I said, I've been shooting since I was, literally 16 or 17 years old, but I haven't been shooting at this level except for the last 7 or 8 years. And I said, so it's something you can definitely learn. And, will you get to be a professional and be the best in the world? Probably not, but there's only so many places on top of the mountain. But it's the view from 70 or 80% up the mountain is still pretty good.
Right. And also I would have to say too, that like a lot of the most successful people in any industry are not the best. In fact, I would wonder what those statistics might look like. It's like, are you good at branding? Are you a good business person? And are you still good? Well, then you can have a career. And the fact of the matter is, like, there's 7 billion of us right now. It's like, if you can just have a small corner as a photographer and you just have enough people that like you or follow you or, want to take your workshops because they just like you. Maybe they're not even their favorite photographer, but they're just like, oh man, this guy, he speaks my language or whatever it is. Like, you can still, you don't have to be the best. You can be good. And I think if you just kind of do things the right way and you find yourself a nice little corner of the universe, like, I still think you can be very happy and you can still get enough out of it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And that's what I'm in it for, is really, it pleases me. I love being out in nature. Carrying the camera along was just second nature for me. So, I do a lot of hiking. I do a lot of, I just love being out there. It's a great peace of mind place. It's a great place to get out and, clear your mind and, take the camera along, and then, to take other people along that enjoy the same thing. It's like anything you do. If you do it with like-minded people, generally speaking, it's a lot of fun and you form really close-knit. If you get halfway decent at it, then it's kind of frosting on the cake.
Yeah, agreed. What's your main schedule over the next year? Are you for sure going in any particular months?
To Maine?
Yeah.
No, I'm definitely going to do a couple more trips this summer. Uh-huh. Maine's kind of screwy right now because theoretically you can't be in there unless you self-quarantine for 14 days. So I actually took that trip. When I took that one trip, I'm looking for some real estate up there. And,
oh, really?
Yeah, up in the Booth Bay or the Camden area.
Oh, no kidding.
When I called up to the hotel, they said, if you're looking for real estate, you can actually, the rules are waived. So I don't want to play that particular hand too often.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm kind of waiting for it to clear, but I'd like to get up there again, once this summer and once in September. For if I had my druthers, I'd go up there for a couple weeks. But if I can just get up there for a week and explore it more, I'd like to get farther up than Camden. I've been to Acadia and I've been to Camden, but I haven't been, like Stonington and Deer Isle, and I haven't been to those. I haven't been to those places in between yet, and
right.
I've got a lot of scouting done on those particular areas that I'd like to kind of investigate and see what the images might look like. So that's probably my next stop is probably getting up a little bit farther into the Stonington area. Staying there for 3 or 4 days.
Well, I was asking because I mean my mother, my wife's family, just purchased a place on Southport. Like, I don't know, in like the off season, in like the winter time or something. And so now they've just kind of rehabbed it and fixed it up and everything. And
Beautiful.
so kind of the way that we're doing it now is we're kind of trying to go up like once a month. And like I said before, that's sort of like my base camp now. So I can now be sort of based in that Booth Bay area, and I can now kind of go out from there. So it's nice when you go spend the night and you go, okay, now what do I want to do? Whereas like I got to drive 15 hours or something all at once. So I was mentioning it because I thought, hey, it would be cool to meet up and shoot or something if you wanted to.
I'd love to. I love Booth Bay. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. In fact, I was supposed to be at a wedding in Southport that got canceled on the 20th of June. So
really?
I was actually up looking at the hotel right up by the what is it, Cuckold Light, right at the end of the island there, the resort that's right there.
Newwagon,
yeah.
That's where I got married.
That's where the wedding was that I was supposed to be at. So I was up. I said, well, as long as I'm up doing this little 24-hour marathon, I'll definitely go by Booth Bay and see what this resort looked like that I was supposed to be at for a friend's wedding. But so I'll definitely love to shoot Booth Bay. It's wonderful. It's an easy hop over to Bailey Island or Cundy Harbor or whatever. There's some great locations, and the only problem with Maine is you're always having to kind of go south down these peninsulas and then come back up to Route 1 and go south down another hour. You look over from Southport to Bailey Island, and it's 5 miles, but it's an hour and 20 minutes to get there, unless you got a boat, of course. So
exactly. I remember I was like, hey, I've never actually shot. What's the one that everybody shoots? The lighthouse, Pemaquid.
Oh, Pemaquid, yeah.
So I'm like, I've never shot Pemaquid, and I'm like, surely that's not far from Southport, and because it's like on the map, it's like, oh, it's here's this peninsula and here's that peninsula, and you're like, oh, how far is it? It's like an hour and 25 minutes, and I'm like, oh my god, this is crazy. But so funny thing though, before we depart here, is so right next to Newwagon is where my wife's family bought that property.
Oh wow!
So
it's beautiful. Right at the end of Southport.
It is the southmost point, except for the Newwagon, and then there's like a couple houses that are there that are like insane, like really, really nice. That I'm sure that's probably some billionaire level. Like those are insane, but like it's right now. Like you can see people getting married. That's how close it was, which is so odd because we got married there. But I don't know if you saw this photo that I posted, but in April we were up there and there was nobody there because that's still the off season.
Sure.
And I went all the way to the very edge of the island, right kind of at the where people sort of do their vows on Newwagon, and I shot that red house.
Oh yeah, across down the island,
which was owned by Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch of the West. I don't know if you know that.
I did not know that.
So it's still in her family. She's not around anymore, obviously, but anyway, so it was like I planned this Milky Way shot, and I wanted to shoot it with a telephoto because it's a good few hundred yards away, and I was like, this is going to be perfect. And in April, the Milky Way rises like right behind that house, and I got it, and I nailed it, and it was so awesome because it was like I mean, I walked like 50 yards, you know what I mean? And it was like, that was it. And that's all I had to do. And it was like, and there's this big imposing Milky Way right behind the Wizard of Oz,
Oh,
the
beautiful.
Wicked Witch house.
I'll check your feet out. I didn't see that one. So,
but I would love to shoot over there. There's so many good spots they're so easy to get to.
Yes.
Out there.
Yeah. Let me know when you're going up, and but I'm pretty flexible, so it's not too bad for me. It's a bit to that is probably right at 3 hours.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah,
you're pretty centrally located in Worcester. You can kind of go any direction.
I can. Yeah. I can go. Portland's an hour and 45 minutes for me, and I can be in Newport in an hour and a half. I can be P-Town in 2 hours and 30 minutes. I can. So I can pretty much go north and south. I can even be in New York City in 3 hours. So
yeah, that's cool.
I'm in 3 hours is kind of my daily. If I'm going to do a day trip, 3 hours is kind of my limit. So it takes me up to northern Vermont, northern New Hampshire, Booth Bay, down to all the way down to the southern Connecticut coast.
Right. And then don't forget to get to Monhegan, you take the ferry from Booth Bay too. Exactly. So if you want to do that, it's right. That's all you have to do.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I wanted to go to Booth Bay. We were actually going to get a room there for a week for this wedding. I said, rather than stay at New Haven, I said, I'd rather stay right in Booth Bay, and get a, Airbnb or something like that. And then after the wedding, explore some of the islands, and because all the island tours seem to leave right from the harbor there.
Right. Yeah. I would love to get your take too on taking some more shots in the town itself of Booth Bay. For some reason, I don't feel that I'm that strong at coming up with compositions of like the harbor. Like, I don't know if I'm just more of it's like, I need either like pure nature or like pure city. Like anything in between, I'm always like, I don't know how to do this. You know what I mean?
I shot it last summer. I was there, but I had a really nice morning with some really nice fog. So I got some really nice images on the crosswalk and the little harbor house there on the crosswalk, and a couple nice harbor images. And I know there's always that iconic image of the moon coming up over the church on the, shooting from right at Booth Bay at that white church on the hill on the other side.
Right.
But you got to catch that, at the right time of year to get the moonrise behind it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, Dave, point being, I would love to shoot with you sometime if we can end up kind of in this similar place at a similar time or something. That would be fun. That'd
be fun.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me.
Hey, my
Dave.
pleasure.
Two whole hours we did. That's pretty good.
Hey, super. Really enjoyed it. Great to talk to you. Nice to meet you online, and hopefully get a chance to do this in person.
Absolutely. Well, take care and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
You as well. Thank you.